fellow assassins, to another episode of the Dark Assassins Podcast, the show that dives deep into not just technology, but the concepts, software, and procedures behind it all, and explains it so simply that even your grandma can understand it. As always, I'm your host, the Dark Assassin. So for the topic that I want to cover in this week's episode, it's been something that I've honestly been thinking about for quite a while. I've thought about doing this episode on a few numerous occasions in the past, but I never really quite was able to, gather my thoughts in the right way and really, put something together that I thought was really worth recording as an episode for the podcast. But I think for this week, I at least got it. Obviously, it's not going to be perfect, as pretty much anything that, anyone does, or especially me does. It's definitely not going to be perfect, but I think it's at least a good I don't even know what words I'm trying to say right now. But the reason why I think it was so hard for me to come up with this was in large part due to the fact that the topic we're going to be covering, torrenting, the reason why I think for me it was so hard to bring myself to talk about this topic is largely in part due to, I guess, the more nefarious nature that it's commonly known for, and the illegal activities that is generally used, and torrenting is used with. But I kind of want to just talk about some actual legitimate use cases and kind of maybe try to brush away that stigma that it is only used for illegal things. But we'll get into that in this episode. But first, let's get into this week's trivia question. And that is, what programming language was developed by Guido van Rossum? I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly. I'm probably not, so my apologies. And was named after a popular television show. Is it A, Python, B, Java, C, C++, or D, Ruby? So again, what programming language was developed by Guido van Rossum and named after a popular television show? I apologize for probably butchering that name. So that is this week's trivia question. Now, on the topic of cybersecurity, before we get into our cybersecurity tip for the week, Google recently released two new top-level domains, those being .zip and .mov, which it just sounds like a horrible idea to me. I don't know why they did it, but basically what this means is you can now type into your search bar in your web browser something.zip or something.mov, and theoretically it will take you to a legitimate, legitimate being used very loosely in the sense that it will actually take you to a website and the domain will be resolved. It will take you to a website with that extension. Now, this has been causing some problems, as one might imagine. One instances being where people will type in whatever they called their zip file, for example, attachment.zip. They'll be like, see attachment.zip, and rather than you clicking on attachment.zip and it downloading the zip file that was attached, it'll take you to some random website. So that is obviously not a desired function, plus the fact that .zip and .mov are such common file extension names that I think a lot of people will just assume that they're files, because why wouldn't you? And there have already been instances where people have been hijacking these links and basically having malware on them. So one instance that I saw already was someone got the domain 42.zip, which is the zip bomb, if you remember the zip bomb. So basically what that is once you start to extract the zip file, it will extract additional zip files, which then all of those zip files will extract themselves, which will create more zip files, and then those zip files will then be extracted, and the process just repeats recursively until your machine becomes unusable. And it basically floods your hard drive, and it's not a good time. But that is something that's being done, and there are also other instances of malware attackers hijacking these .zip links and not having a good time for some people. Some people are definitely not having a good time. Although there was one instance, I forget what the URL was, but someone hijacked it to be the Rick Astley Never Gonna Give You Up song. So somewhere out there's a .zip URL that will rickroll you. So of course that had to be done. I give props to whoever did that. That is pretty funny. But I thought this was something to bring to your attention, that now you have to be weary when you see something.zip or something.mov and it's a hyperlink to some website. So that is something to be cautious of. Now, I know I forget if I actually discussed what top-level domain is. So when we're talking about top-level domains, basically what that means, that is whatever the dot is. So if you have a .com, the .com is the top-level domain. If you have a .org, the .org is the top-level domain. Same for .net. Those are the top-level domains. And basically those, you can buy a domain name with one of those extensions, and then subsequently they have their own, DNS records, and there's a lot of other stuff behind the scenes, but that's basically what we mean when we say a top-level domain. It's basically whatever the dot and then the ending is. So just something to be wary of. Now, with that, let's get into this week's cybersecurity tip. So this week's cybersecurity tip is something that I generally have to remind myself of every now and again, and that is checking your app's permissions. So one thing that I always find myself doing every few months or so, I'd say, is going through my phone's settings and going into each one of the apps and checking what permissions I have set for them, since sometimes I forget what permissions I granted them. And generally there will be instances where I'll be like, wait a second, why am I giving this app permissions to my photos when I never have it use my photos? Disable. Or why am I giving this app access to my camera and microphone when I basically never use my camera and microphone with it? Disable. So those are some things that I generally go through, and I would say it's probably best practice to use the principle of least privilege in this case, and only give apps permission to the things that they actually need permission to use. And even still, if you wanted to go another level in your security, is to just disable everything and then only enable it when you actually need it. So basically what this could mean is, say you're using a social media platform like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, something like that, and you generally don't post anything on there. So in those cases, you don't need to have access to your photos. They don't need to have access to your microphone or your camera or any of that stuff. So you can just disable them. And then whenever you decide that you want to post pictures from, I don't know, say you went on a vacation, you want to post some pictures from the vacation, then you can go into the settings and you can, enable access to photos, select the photos you want and upload those photos. And then when you're done, go back into the settings and disable that access. So if you want to be extra secure, that's probably something that you can do. But yeah, this is something because I definitely find myself doing this every now and again. Going through periodically and just checking those app permissions because, to be honest, I don't remember all the app permissions that I set for stuff. And sometimes if I have had an app for a while, when I originally got that app, I might not have been as privacy or security focused as I am now. So I might realize that this app has access to something that it doesn't need access to, and then I go in and disable it. So it's generally, or maybe, the app just has access to something that you never knew it did, or now there's a toggle that there wasn't there before that you can now enable or disable. So it's just something good to go in and periodically check to make sure that the apps on your device only have access to the things that you want it to have access and basically need to have access. Because going back to the principle of least privilege, if something doesn't need access to something, it shouldn't have access to it, because that's just asking for problems. Whether it's a user on a device or on a network that doesn't need access to a certain machine or doesn't need admin privileges, if you give them that access, you're just asking for security problems, because maybe that person isn't malicious, but if some reason their account gets compromised, then whoever compromised their account now has access to everything they do. And if their account had access to things that they didn't need and shouldn't have access to, that could obviously cause problems. So the same thing goes for apps on your phone and permissions for apps as well. So that is your cybersecurity tip for the week. Now, before we get into nerdy stuff, there was a quite funny story that I wanted to share with you guys. And this is coming from my day job. Now, it's not anything specific. It's just kind of a funny kind of remark that happened. So basically what happened was I was in the process of taking over a coding project from one of the senior devs that on my team that's retiring, and I was trying to get my development environment set up and configured so I could, build his code and all that stuff. And I kept running into issues trying to get things configured and whatnot. And what was pretty funny was he passed by my desk as I was, configuring things, and he was like, "Oh, yeah, you seem to know, look like you know what you're doing." And I was like, "Oh, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just experimenting with confidence." And he got a good kick out of that. He thought it was pretty funny because, quite honestly, I had no idea what I was doing. Well, I take that back. I did know what I was doing in the sense that I knew the steps that I had to go through in order to get the development environment set up. I just didn't know what settings and what toggles I needed to, and what buttons to press, as you could say. I didn't know exactly what dials to turn and buttons to press and that kind of a thing. I knew the process I needed to go through, just not all of the configuration that I needed to do. And it was kind of a trial and error, I guess you could say, to get it working. But because I was doing it with confidence, it made it look like I knew exactly what I was doing, when in reality I was just basically guessing. So that is something that is kind of interesting. If you do anything confidently, people will just naturally assume that you know what you're doing, even if you actually in reality have no idea what you're doing. So that is kind of something to keep in mind, and maybe even something to watch out for if you see someone either saying something or doing something really confidently, and it's something that you may or may not be, I guess, super akin to or knowledgeable about. It might be something you might want to double check about, because they might be using this experimenting with confidence principle, or just in general, just saying something confidently. Because if you're if you project a level of confidence, like it seems like you know what you're doing and or talking about, people will generally assume that you know what you're doing and or talking about because it looks like it, even when in reality they might actually have no idea what they're saying or talking about or whatever. So I just thought that was quite interesting, I guess, life lesson, if you will. Experimenting with confidence. I thought that was quite interesting. So with that, let's get into what nerdy stuff have I been up to this week. So for this week, I honestly almost lost a solid chunk of gold. Now, you might be wondering, what the heck does a solid chunk of gold have anything to do with anything nerdy or programming or home labbing or anything like that related? And of course, when I say I almost lost a solid chunk of gold, I am talking about my Raspberry Pi, because we all know the price of Raspberry Pis are absolutely through the roof right now, and Raspberry Pis might as well be solid pieces of gold because of how expensive they are. So the reason why I say I almost lost it was because I started to notice on some of my monitoring dashboards and whatnot, my Raspberry Pi was having intermittent instances where it was just dropping offline for a while, which I found rather peculiar. And I went over to look at it, and the lights on it were still blinking, so at least it appeared like it should be working. And my assumption was it was maybe stuck in some kind of boot loop or something. So what I did was I ended up unplugging it, shutting it down, unplugging it, and plugging it into a monitor so I could actually see what the heck was going on. And at first, it didn't even boot at all. And I was like, well, this isn't good. And then I was like, wait a second, I'm not actually using a legit power supply for it. I'm just using a standard, like, regular old random power brick and micro USB cable or whatnot. So I was like, okay, this is probably an issue. So I went and actually got a real power adapter for it, plugged it in, and it seemed to be working perfectly fine. So I wasn't exactly sure what the issue was. So then I figured, you know what? Let me plug in its actual power supply that I was using for it. And I plugged that in, and I noticed a warning message pop up that said, like, something to the effect of, like, it was some kind of, like, low voltage warning or something. So for whatever reason, that power adapter seemed to be having some problems or going bad. But thankfully, I did have an extra one lying around that I was able to plug in. And since that, I haven't really had any issues with it, and it's been rock solid and it hasn't been intermittent on me. So I'm assuming something with that low voltage thing on the other power adapter was causing it to, like, shut itself off and reboot itself. So that was, I'm probably assuming, the issue. But even if it would have actually died, because part of me was wondering if maybe the micro SD card on it was going bad, because micro SD cards aren't exactly known for their resiliency, especially when compared to other mediums like hard drives or SSDs, for example. So I thought maybe that was the issue and I'll just need to get a new micro SD card for it. But nope, just turns out that it was the power adapter. But even if I would have lost it, it wouldn't have been a huge loss, because first off, my model is the 3B Plus, and I think it's like 5-ish years old now or something like that. So it's not exactly, it's obviously not the newest one. And honestly, I don't really even use it for that much anyway. It just kind of sits there and looks pretty, I guess. So it doesn't really serve much functional purpose in my home lab. So even if it would have gone bad and died or whatever, it wouldn't have been the end of the world. But just thought I'd mention that, that especially considering that, Raspberry Pis aren't exactly cheap right now, although I did see a interview that Jeff Geerling did with I think it was the CEO of Raspberry Pi, and according to that interview, the CEO mentioned that Raspberry Pis should be pretty much back on shelves and back pretty much available anywhere by the end of the year. So hopefully that's a good sign for anyone looking to get themselves a Raspberry Pi. But yeah, so thought I'd talk about that. And the other thing that I did this week was I mentioned last week and maybe the past couple weeks how I've been working on optimizing my video game that I'm making, the code for it. So I was doing some even more refactoring and optimizing for that, and really just slashing down the memory footprint and storage footprint that the save data is going to take up, and just really just slashing that memory usage and optimizing it. And what I did this time was I mentioned in a previous episode that I condensed, so I was making a Pokemon game, right? And I condensed each move that a Pokemon knows down to a single integer value. And this week I was basically taking that even further and completely slashing the Pokemon class even more and creating a newer, more slimmed down version that basically removes all of the stuff that's only required like once, right? Like if I have a Pokemon, I don't really need to care what its base stat totals are, because I can just reference the just kind of like I was doing with the moves, right? I'm going to have just one instance in a global data structure of all the different moves, so I can just reference that move specifically. I can do the same thing with the Pokemon too, so I can basically just strip out everything from this class that's going to be constant and just reference it through a global object or global data structure. So that's what I've been working on. And I've also been refining the serialization portion of it. So the portion of it that will basically save the Pokemon's content and write it out to a file, so then I can read that data back in and recreate it every time the program's launched. So that's what I've been working on this week. So those are the nerdy things. So with all of that, let's get into the real meat and potatoes of this episode, and that being the topic of torrenting. So I think the general idea when people think of torrenting is thinking that it's only used by those no-good scoundrels known as the internet pirates. And boy, oh boy, if you fall into that category, this is going to be quite the interesting episode for you. Because if you think that those are the only people that torrent anything, then just as a news flash, I guess, you just labeled a lot of Linux distributions and a lot of individuals such as myself who got their Linux ISOs from said distributions as pirates, even though Linux is free and open source and not copywritten in a way that using a torrent or downloading it would violate any such copyright. So, but the reason why torrenting gets a bad rap is obviously because it's generally kind of known for illegally downloading things like music, movies, TV shows, software, and other kinds of copywritten material. So people will download this illegally so they don't actually have to pay for it. So that's kind of, I guess, in the main cultural idea of torrenting, although that isn't all of what torrenting can do, and there are actually many valid use cases for torrenting, which we will get into. But of course, because it does have this stigma of being used to acquire copywritten material illegally, I need to preface this whole conversation by saying that I do not condone using it, torrenting, to download copywritten material illegally. So don't do that. It's bad. Now, with that out of the way, first we need to understand and break this, I guess, idea that torrenting equals piracy, and any kind of piracy means that torrenting was used. Because if you want to envision how these two relate to one another, it's basically a Venn diagram. In the middle, you have acts of torrenting that were also acts of piracy, downloading copywritten content illegally, and then you have acts of torrenting that are completely legal, completely legit, like downloading, say, Linux ISOs, and then you have, on the other side, acts of piracy or downloading illegal content illegally, but you didn't use torrenting for it. So just wanted to clear that. And as I mentioned, there are some pretty valid use cases for using torrenting. As we discussed, a lot of Linux distributions actually have a torrent for their ISOs or their image that you can, flash like a USB or a CD or something and then insert into your computer and install the operating system. They have torrents for that rather than you having to go through a single server and download it. Like, say, if you want to download, any other piece of software, you'll go to like the creator's website. Like, for example, if you want to download Windows, you go to Microsoft's website and then you can download the ISO from Microsoft's website. So for the torrenting solution, you'd basically download a torrent file and then you would connect to a bunch of other people that also have that torrent file, and you would essentially download bits and pieces of the actual file you want. So in this case, say a Linux ISO, you would download bits and pieces of the Linux ISO from a bunch of different people that all have downloaded the ISO, and then you basically join all those together, and then you get your fully downloaded ISO. So that's we'll get into a little bit more about how that works, but that's kind of the general gist of how it works. And another reason how this could have a valid use case, if there is, say, information on a company or government that said company or government might not want you to know, but is not necessarily illegal information, like maybe it's just makes them look bad, for example. If you were to, say, upload that to a website, that company or that government could easily take down that website, whether that's through a denial of service attack or through, actually shutting down your service. Whether that's if you're hosting it in the cloud, they maybe could, go in. If, say, for example, like I guess Amazon, if you had your website hosted through AWS, they could easily just, shut off your service, down goes your website, down goes that information that you had hosted on there. But because torrenting, as we'll discuss, is distributed, anyone who already downloaded that data and has the torrent can give it to anyone else who wants it. So you don't have to, that isn't an issue of a company can't go after said website where the data is hosted and just take it down, because you're essentially, it's basically like, I think it's the Hydra from, was it Greek or Roman I think it's Greek mythology, the one where like you cut off a head and then like more grow back. It's just because you cut the head off doesn't mean that it's actually dead. That kind of a thing. And another use case would be transferring very large files. So that's another common use for torrenting, because as we'll discuss, because it's distributed, you can pull resources from a lot more locations at once to download potentially significantly increase your download speeds. And another use case that it could also have is for backing up data too. So kind of in the same vein as this idea of it being distributed and being able to transfer large files, theoretically, you could have, your backups, across multiple remote machines, remote devices, multiplications. I mean, we've talked about the importance of having, the 3-2-1 backup solution, multiple backups in multiple locations to ensure that you never lose your data. So theoretically, if you had, your data hosted at, say, a friend's house, maybe family member's house, maybe in the cloud, you had these backups hosted in other places, you could have a single torrent file for your backups, and then say your main laptop dies for whatever reason, you could download the single torrent file, which is pretty small, and then that'll connect to your network of other torrent devices that have your backup data on there, and then you can download your backup from all those devices at once and increase the speed of that download by combining the power of the internet connection of all those other devices to quickly download your backup back to your machine. So there are definitely some valid use cases for torrenting. It's not just, only used for illegal activity. So just wanted to get that out there. Now, there are some key concepts that we've kind of alluded to that I want to kind of touch on before we get any further into this. And the first concept is this idea of a peer-to-peer connection. So basically what this means is you're communicating directly to another device. So you're not going through any kind of internet hops or hopping, all around to get to your device. You're going directly from one device to another device. So that's basically how torrent, I don't know if you could call them networks, maybe you can. Basically how they interact is you all connect directly to each other and then share the different bits and pieces of the file to download or upload them or seed them, as they call it. And basically the idea of seeding is the act of giving parts of the file to others that need it. So because torrenting works on a distributed, decentralized, concept, idea, whatever. Basically, if you have, say, downloaded that Linux ISO onto your machine and you have the torrent active, you'll do what's called seeding the torrent, which basically means if someone else is trying to download that Linux ISO through torrenting, what your machine will do will communicate with the network and give bits and pieces of that Linux ISO to the person that's requesting to download it. So in essence, you could maybe give, say the first 100 bytes of it, and then the last, say, 400 bytes of it, and then maybe you give somewhere in the middle, you give 2 gigabytes worth of it, and then that's what you upload. You're not actually giving them the whole torrent or the whole Linux ISO because someone else that also has the Linux ISO is giving them other parts to it. So basically the peer-to-peer connection and the active seeding allows the people that have already downloaded the file to give parts to others that are requesting it. And because it is decentralized, it allows basically anyone that has downloaded it to use whatever their internet speed is to then upload it to others who need it. So in theory, this could actually lead to significantly faster download speeds of files rather than just going to a single server and trying to download it for a couple of reasons. One being sometimes servers that host files for download will cap the speed that people can download from. And I mean, this obviously makes sense because if you're running some kind of content delivery network and you're trying to distribute content for people to be able to download, you obviously don't want everyone you obviously don't want everyone downloading at the maximum speed they can, because you'll quickly run out of bandwidth, or the amount of speed that you're able to dish out. So as we talked about when we kind of did a deep dive on networking, if you only have 1 gigabit worth of bandwidth, and that means you can only pump out 1 gigabit per second worth of data at a time. So regardless of whether you have one person connecting through that 1 gigabit connection, or you have 500 people connecting to that 1 gigabit connection, you're only able to pump out 1 gigabit at a time. So if you limit and put a cap on that, you can ensure that you're never going to be bottlenecked to heck, and generally you won't have to worry about any kind of denial of service, or, well, I mean, it's still a concern, but like you generally won't have, it'll be constant performance for anyone who tries to download it. But torrenting is different because you're not downloading from that single server, you're downloading from a bunch of other people that all have the file. You're basically able to download at whatever your max download speed is, and what everyone else's max upload speed is. So someone that has a super fast internet connection can give you that data really quickly, and someone else with another chunk of it that also has a really fast internet connection can be given that to you really quickly, and you can be pulling in those 2 super fast streams at the same time to your device and download the file significantly quicker than if you were just downloading it from one server. So that is one reason why one of the big pros that torrenting can provide is the potential for significantly faster download speeds. So when we talked about it potentially being a solution for being able to recover your backups, if you had your backups, your single backup of whatever your data is as a torrent file across multiple locations, you could basically pool together the combined internet speed of those locations to download to your device. Or even if you had this in your home network, you could potentially do it as well. Although I would argue you probably wouldn't see as much benefit doing it all in your local home network, obviously, because you lose the redundancy of all of the backups being in one place, which not great. But also you could just do a direct connection to whatever server has the backups on it and just max out that connection speed that way. So it wouldn't necessarily be a concern. But if, say, you have your backup located, say, in the cloud, and you have another copy at a friend's house and another copy, say, at your parents' house or another friend's house, you could pull together all their internet connection speeds at once rather than just relying on one possibly slower one to download your backups quicker. So those are some pros. And then, as I mentioned, because it's decentralized, no government or company can forcibly take down the file. So once there is a torrent out there of a particular file, as long as someone is seeding that file, it will always exist. So even if nobody seeds it for 10 months, and then someone that has the torrent starts seeding it again, it becomes available again. So any company or organization or government or whatever that's trying to squash something from getting around it's basically impossible, because as long as people are willing to seed the torrent, it's going to be, basically impossible for them to do anything about it and get that off the internet. So this could obviously be potentially beneficial if a government or a company is trying to hide something, and this torrent that is being seeded exposes that thing that they're trying to hide, that obviously we're assuming a totally legal purpose, and it's just something that makes them look bad, rather than it being like copyright material or confidential or classified material or something like that. So like I said, as long as there are people are seeding it, the data will always exist. And because it's distributed, it obviously reduces the risk of your single server hosting that download coming to a grinding halt from all the people trying to download it at once. So again, could potentially lead to faster download speeds. Not being bottlenecked by a single server is also another thing. And then again, the combined upload speed as well. Now, here comes, I guess, part of the question with whenever you're talking about torrenting. Obviously, the question of downloading illegal copywritten material comes into question. Now, as I mentioned before, pirating and downloading copywritten material illegally is obviously illegal. So don't use torrenting for pirating and downloading copywritten material illegally. I do not condone that. But with that said, I think you could potentially, there are people out there that do make the argument that just because you are downloading something illegally doesn't necessarily make it ethically wrong. And I think because how closely related torrenting is to this concept, it was something potentially worth addressing. But like I said, pirating and downloading copywritten material is illegal, so don't do it. I don't condone it. Now, with that said, let's kind of get into, I guess, some of the main arguments that people will make in favor of downloading things illegally and it being ethically okay. First being, I guess we can start off with music. Now, music, I don't think this is really that big of an issue anymore, since I think most people nowadays generally just use some streaming service like Apple Music or Spotify. But if you're old school like me and you actually like owning your own media, actually having the physical copies of the song that you can have on your device is nice, because then you don't have to worry about some streaming service no longer wanting to supply that song, or maybe there is some disagreement that happens between the record label and your streaming service, and they pull the song off the streaming service so you can't listen to it anymore. Basically, having the physical copy of the song, in this case songs, could be beneficial to you, because then you don't have to worry about any kind of shenanigans of it never being available, and it always is available because you have it. So that is one reason why some people download songs illegally. Now, let's take this example here. So hypothetically, Bob pirates 10 songs valued at $1.29 each, since I think generally that's what iTunes charges for a song. So he downloads 10 songs, that's $12.90. So he essentially stole $12.90 from that artist. Now, obviously, that's illegal and that's bad, and Bob shouldn't have done that. But what if Bob then listened to those songs, really liked this artist, and then proceeded to buy, say, a $20 t-shirt from their website, and then also decided to buy a concert ticket and go see them live in concert? Now, one could argue, and some do argue, that while yes, Bob did obtain the music illegally, he more than adequately made up for that by, buying the t-shirt, the $20 t-shirt, and then the concert ticket. So he more than, gave his dues, I guess you could say, to the artist for their work, even though the music he downloaded he didn't pay for. He compensated them in other ways. So some would make the argument that while technically it's illegal because it is, ethically speaking, Bob is not in the wrong. Now, obviously, you, the listener, you can decide whether you think Bob is in the wrong or not. That is just an argument that some people will make on the subject. Now, I think a more common way that pirating and I guess torrenting in this case, since we're talking about torrenting in this episode, is used is movies and TV shows. So here is an example where you could potentially argue that what you're doing, while technically illegal, is not ethically wrong, as some people will try to argue. So let's assume that you go to the store and you bought a Blu-ray of your favorite movie. Let's say Finding Nemo, because Finding Nemo is a pretty good movie. So say you went out and you bought Finding Nemo on Blu-ray, and because you want a digital copy of the movie to, say, put on your Plex server or your Jellyfin server, you need a digital copy of Finding Nemo. But you have the Blu-ray. But the problem is you don't have any kind of Blu-ray drive that you can plug into your computer in order to rip the Blu-ray and get to the movie file off of that Blu-ray. So you are basically out of luck, right? You can't get, if you don't have the Blu-ray reader to read the Blu-ray, you're kind of out of luck. So basically at this point, you have a few options. You could either pay for a digital copy, which some would say seems kind of silly since you already own the physical copy. Your other option would be buy a Blu-ray reader that you could plug into your computer that you could then rip the Blu-ray and get the data off of. Or the other option is you could download a digital copy of the movie illegally through some means, potentially in this case torrenting, and get it that way. Now, what some will argue is because you already paid for the Blu-ray, you already compensated the film producer, and you basically paid your dues. You compensated everyone by buying the physical copy of the Blu-ray, and now you're just getting a digital copy of it. Yes, you got it illegally, but some would argue that ethically you're not in the wrong because you already paid for it, right? You already paid for it once. Why would you pay for it again? You already bought it, so you should be able to have a digital copy if you want one. Obviously, the proper thing to do and the appropriate legal thing to do would be you would buy a separate digital copy if you wanted a digital copy, because I think technically ripping Blu-rays might also be illegal. I'm not 100% sure. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so don't take any of this as legal advice, obviously. But I think, again, don't quote me on this, not legal advice. I think as long as you don't distribute the Blu-ray to anyone, if you rip it, I think you're fine. But again, don't quote me on that. Don't take it as legal advice. But again, I think part of the main issue when it comes to torrenting in this regard, when it comes to downloading media of any kind illegally, is okay. So first, I guess we can take, assuming that just taking a Blu-ray that you own or a DVD and ripping it and getting a digital copy that way. If we assume that as long as you don't distribute it, it's legal. I guess the main issue with torrenting is the fact that in the process of torrenting and downloading the file, you also seed the file at the same time. So while you only intend to use it for personal use, in the process of downloading it via torrent, you are also then giving it to other people, which I believe, again, I'm not a lawyer, so this isn't legal advice, but I believe that is where kind of the other part of the big issue comes from. Obviously, if you're downloading it illegal and you didn't pay for it, that's a big problem, number one. But the other problem is you are then distributing it out to other people just through the nature of how the torrenting protocol works, and how once you're connected into this, the swarm, I guess is what they call it, the swarm of all the people connecting and sharing the file in question. Once you connect to that swarm, you are assuming you haven't completed the download yet, you are downloading and seeding the file at the same time, which is, I believe, partly where the issue comes from, because that is, in essence, you sharing this copywritten piece of material illegally, even though you might not have necessarily intended to do so. But again, some would still argue from the ethics standpoint, regardless of how you do it, because you already paid for it, in the case of the movie that we were talking about, because you already paid for it, ethically speaking, you're not in the wrong for downloading a copy of it illegally. Now, again, as I've said many times, don't download things illegally, because that is wrong. But just from the ethical standpoint, some would make the argument that it is not necessarily wrong. Now, obviously, I think everyone's kind of in agreement. If you download something illegally just because you don't want to pay for it, and you don't compensate the person who created said work, whether that's software, music, movie, TV, whatever, I'm pretty sure everyone's in agreement that that is not good. But the argument that people try to make is, if you compensate the person who created the work in other ways, but you acquire something illegally, then ethically speaking, you can, I guess, sleep easy at night, I guess. But yeah, it's kind of a big topic on the internet that people like to discuss. Another kind of thing in the same vein that certain people say is piracy is using ad block, which I kind of disagree with. But some would make the argument that ad block is also a form of piracy, mainly because if you block ads, you are then not allowing that creator or that website or what have you to get money from whoever would be supplying the money through the ad, so they would not get money from it. Now, that is, I guess, a valid argument, but on the flip side, if I'm just going to completely ignore the ad anyway, I'm basically wasting that company's money, because I'm paying no attention at all to the money that they're spending to try to get their ad, and they're basically wasting that money. So, in essence, either the content creator gets nothing, or the company supplying the ad gets absolutely nothing. So it's really a lose-lose situation for everyone. So obviously it makes sense from the content creator's perspective, because they want the money, and I mean, they created the content, and of course they want the money. But from the advertiser's perspective, if you use ad block, they don't have to pay for that view, I guess, or whatever, so that saves them money, so they like that. So there's obviously two sides to every coin, right? But when it comes, I guess, specifically to the content creator perspective, I believe Louis Rossmann has made some pretty good videos on the subject when it comes specifically to ad block being a form of piracy. And basically his main thing, which I kind of agree with, is you're better off just like tipping a content creator like $1 and watching like over 1,000 of their videos with ad block on, than actually watching their videos without ad block. and actually watching the ads, because how little ads pay out to content creators. You're essentially better off just like giving them like $1 or $2 and then using ad block, because how little they make from ads. So that's I guess that's another thing that some people will make the argument about. But like, as I mentioned, there's two sides to that argument. There's the advertisers that are spending money on the ads, and the content creators that are getting paid from that money spent on the ads. So if you put the ad block on, that's basically just preventing the content creator from getting money. But on the flip side, if you don't use ad block and just completely ignore the ad like I do, that's just wasting the company supplying the ads money, because that's a complete waste of an impression, as what they call when they show you an ad. That's called an impression. So that's just a waste of an impression for the company, and they're never getting that money back. So two sides to every coin here. I guess ethically, that's a question for you to decide. Basically, this kind of tangent of talking about the ethics of it isn't me necessarily to say what I think you should or shouldn't do. I am just trying to bring to light what other people will make the arguments for in one side or the other, and then you can then make the decision for yourself on what you want to do, because after all, it's your life. You can do what you want. But yeah, that's that. So that was the wild world of torrenting. And I think you can kind of see, hopefully, the main thing that I hope that you take away from this is that torrenting is a pretty great protocol, and has a lot of really awesome and valid use cases, and can be used for a wide variety of things, and is a lot more than just supposedly, it is a lot more than only being used by internet pirates and people trying to acquire things illegally, and actually has a lot of legitimate use cases and can be pretty good for instances like that as well. So before we end here, let's get back to our trivia question for the week. So this week's trivia question was, what programming language was developed by Guido van Rossum and named after a popular television show? A, Python, B, Java, C, C++, or D, Ruby? Now, if you said A, Python, you are correct. And that, of course, being the television show Monty Python. So that is where that came from. So I think maybe some of the older crowd that actually watched Monty Python might have been able to potentially get that one. And maybe you also just got lucky and made a lucky guess. That's also pretty cool too. Or maybe you just knew that fact, or maybe you just got the question wrong. Either way, that was this week's trivia question. And if you enjoyed this episode, I ask that you leave it a rating and review, and subscribe to the Dark Assassins podcast if you haven't done so already. Also, be sure to share with a friend or family member who might only think that torrenting is used for illegal activities and doesn't actually have any positives. And if you have any questions about this show, or any topics or comments for future episodes, shoot me an email at contact@darkassassinsinc.com. You can also click the link down in the show notes below for that. And that's going to do it for me in this episode of the Dark Assassins podcast. Until next time, my fellow assassins, remember, bull nothing equals true. If action not equal to null, return true. I'll see you next time on the Dark Assassins podcast.